Archie Bunker is a man who prides himself on knowing exactly how the world works, but during this stretch of his life, everything seems to be lining up to prove him wrong. It starts on an ordinary day that refuses to stay ordinary. On his way across Queens, Archie ends up in a cab with a passenger who suddenly collapses, limp and unresponsive. In his mind, it is a nightmare. A stranger slumped across from him, the driver panicking, no one else around who seems to know what to do. Archie, who is forever complaining about other people, now finds himself the only one in a position to act. Grumbling and protesting even in the moment, he leans in to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, pushing air into the stranger's lungs, trying to pull a life back from the edge while telling himself he is certainly not kissing anybody. The scene is both comic and serious. He is clumsy and outraged at the same time, yet what he is doing is undeniably brave. The ambulance arrives, the stranger is taken away, and Archie goes back to his neighborhood bar, determined to turn the whole thing into a story he can control. At the bar, with a drink in his hand and his friends gathered around, he retells the incident in the only language he knows: jokes, exaggerations, and complaints. He paints the picture of the cab ride, the collapse, and his own reluctant heroism, emphasizing how much he didn't want to do it, but they have as much right to live as anybody. The bar owner, realizing this might be good publicity, calls in a local reporter who runs a human interest column. Suddenly, Archie is being considered for Citizen of the Week, and his stubborn resistance to attention melts the moment he hears there is a $100 check involved. He postures as a modest savior, happy to be recognized if it comes with cash, while his drinking buddies nudge and tease him about being a big hero who still has to pay for his own beer if he goes beyond 2 on the house. For a man who rarely gets praise from the wider world, the idea that the newspaper might print his name as an everyday hero is intoxicating. Just when Archie thinks he has contained the story, the person whose life he saved walks through the bar door. Beverly LaSalle is glamorous, confident, and expressive, the sort of person who fills a room by simply stepping into it. She has tracked him down to offer thanks face to face. To Archie's surprise, she is not discreet or shy. She announces herself with warmth and theatrical charm, speaking of how grateful she is and insisting that he is a lifesaver. For a moment, he allows himself to bask in the attention, flattered by the idea that this elegant lady owes him her life. Edith, when she hears about Beverly, invites her home, as she would any guest who has a connection to her husband. Sitting in the bunker living room, Beverly explains that she is in show business, performing 3 shows a night and traveling frequently. Edith interprets this as a woman who entertains by imitating other women, and she is pleased by the cleverness of it. Then Beverly calmly explains the truth. She is a performer who was born male and lives and works in women's clothing. The revelation lands like a small explosion in that cramped living room. Edith's eyes widen, but her instinct is still to be kind. She asks questions, fumbles over the unfamiliar vocabulary, and tries to hide her shock in politeness. Archie, when he arrives and pieces together that the person he gave mouth-to-mouth to is not the conventional woman he assumed, is thrown into a tailspin. His carefully rehearsed hero story no longer fits his preconceptions. For a man who sees the world in rigid categories, being praised for saving a life he struggles to label rattles his sense of self. The script he had prepared for the reporter suddenly feels dangerous. What if people find out? What does it say about him? The show plays this for comedy, but underneath the punchlines lies the truth that Archie is being forced to confront the gap between what he thinks he believes and what he actually did. He acted purely on instinct to help another human being, and that act refuses to be neatly boxed into his prejudices. While Archie's world is being unsettled from the outside, the heart of the family is changing from within. Gloria, his daughter, has discovered that she is pregnant. For her, the news initially feels like a beautiful secret, a continuation of the love story she has with her husband Michael. Yet almost immediately the joy is overshadowed by his reaction. Michael, a graduate student and idealist, has been burying himself in books and arguments about overpopulation, environmental collapse, and the ethics of bringing new life into a crowded planet. Instead of reacting as a thrilled father-to-be, he retreats into theory, talking about whether it is responsible to have children at all. Gloria hears this as rejection not only of the pregnancy but of her. In her mind, his worry about the world is an excuse to avoid the responsibilities and vulnerability of being a parent. Seeking comfort, Gloria turns to Irene, the neighbor who has become a kind of older friend and mentor. Irene listens as Gloria describes the cold logic Michael has thrown at her, how he seems more concerned with charts and statistics than with the beating heart inside his wife. Irene, who takes seriously the idea that women should have control over their own bodies, is honest about the weight of the decision. She acknowledges that there are circumstances where a woman might decide not to continue a pregnancy, and she doesn't rush Gloria to any conclusion. Instead, she urges her to separate what she wants from what she fears, and to recognize that no one else can live with the consequences of the choice as intimately as she will. For Gloria, who is emotionally raw and feels abandoned, the conversation is both clarifying and disturbing. It puts in front of her the possibility that she might have to decide alone whether this baby will be born. Edith eventually enters the emotional storm, and here the show lays bare the tension between political ideas and personal reality. Edith has watched debates on television about women's rights and reproductive freedom. She has nodded along when commentators say a woman should be free to choose. Yet when she is sitting across from her own daughter, who may be carrying her grandchild, all the clear positions blur. Edith confesses that from her armchair at home she could easily agree with women on television. But when Gloria is the one in question, she feels something different, an attachment to the baby she has never seen. She admits that she already feels love for this potential grandchild, that she cannot look at this situation as if it were abstract. In that admission, the viewer sees how difficult it is for ordinary people to apply principles consistently when their own family is involved. Gloria, torn apart by fear, breaks down, saying that Michael has left, that she may be forced to make the hardest decision of her life without him. She imagines a future where she is a single mother, raising a child whose father disappeared into his own worries. Edith tries to soothe her, insisting that Michael will come back, that his leaving is not permanent. But even as she speaks the words, Edith herself is anxious. The home, already charged by Archie's anxieties and prejudices, now feels like it might crack under the pressure of a new life arriving in the middle of so much uncertainty. When Archie walks in on this scene, he initially reacts in character. Irritation at the tears, frustration that the house is in emotional chaos when he is already dealing with his own outside crises. Yet, pushed by Edith and simply by the sight of his daughter's distress, he sits down and allows a different side of himself to emerge. Without planning to, he begins to tell stories. He reminds Gloria of when she was 6 years old and he used to walk her to school, how she clung to his hand as other kids laughed, how he reluctantly let go one day so she could stand on her own. He confesses that even when she thought she was walking alone, he would follow half a block behind, pretending to be casual but tripping over trash cans because he was too busy watching her to see where he was going. He describes the moment in the maternity ward when he first saw her through the glass among dozens of newborns, how in his memory she looked straight at him and smiled as if she already knew he was her father. Whether that memory is literally true or shaped by years of love, it becomes his way of telling her she has never been alone. These stories, offered without sentimentality but full of feeling, slowly pull Gloria back from the edge. She remembers that the gruff, loud man in front of her once carried her, protected her, and rejoiced at her existence in a way she had never fully understood. In a house where affection is often hidden behind sarcasm, this moment of clarity matters. Archie is, in his own stubborn way, arguing for the value of life, not through moral slogans but through the invisible threads that tie parents and children together. He does not lecture her about right and wrong. He simply reminds her that when she was helpless, someone loved her enough to stumble down the street behind her, and that perhaps the baby she carries deserves the same devotion. Meanwhile, Michael has been walking the streets alone, lost in his own head. He swings between intellectual arguments and gut fear, fear of failing as a father, fear of not providing, fear of losing control over his own future. When he finally returns home, he walks into a living room full of people who have been there holding Gloria up while he vanished. Archie, predictably, throws a few barbs his way, mocking the idea of walking and thinking at the same time. But even he senses that this is not the moment for pure mockery. Gloria insists that whatever Michael has to say, he must say in front of everyone, because his choice to leave in the middle of a crisis was not a private matter. It affected them all. Michael, under pressure, and stripped of his philosophical shield, finally speaks from his heart instead of his books. He admits that he let fear and ideas about overpopulation overshadow his love, that he feels overwhelmed but that he does want this child, that the thought of their baby makes him happy despite his terror. The atmosphere in the room changes. Edith lights up with joy at the thought of being a grandmother at last. She jokes that she always dreamed of the sequence: first a wife, then a mother, then a grandmother, as though life were a chain of roles to be earned. And now she will finally reach the last one. Archie shouts her down lovingly, telling her not to make a speech, but the relief is obvious, even in his grumbling. The crisis has not vanished. The future is still uncertain. But the worst fear, that Gloria would be abandoned and forced into a decision against her will, has been pushed aside by Michael's clumsy, honest declaration that love matters more than his theories. Beyond the family drama, there is another fault line running through Archie's life: his job. After years on the loading dock, a foreman position is opening up, and Archie automatically assumes it should be his. Seniority, loyalty, and experience, in his view, are the natural ticket to promotion. Yet he hears rumors that the company is trying to appear progressive, that they may consider a woman, perhaps even his neighbor Irene, for the supervisory job. The idea offends everything inside him. At the dinner table, he launches into one of his long monologues about the proper place for women, invoking images of housewives, mothers, and ancient cave women supposedly built by nature for cooking and childbearing. In this fantasy history, men hunt and make decisions. Women stay home and make babies. Michael pushes back with sarcasm and logic, pointing out that these stories say more about Archie's imagination than about reality. In the middle of this heated exchange, Archie's longtime co-worker Elmo appears at the front door. They have worked side by side for 2 decades, joking and insulting each other in the way men sometimes do when their real affection makes them shy. It is the first time Elmo has ever stepped into Archie's house, a fact that surprises them both. Elmo brings news from the job. The boss is starting a charity drive, and Archie believes that whoever signs up first and throws himself into the cause might curry favor and secure the promotion. For a man who distrusts change and feels threatened by new rules about equality, the idea that he has to flatter management in this way is both humiliating and necessary. He sees the charity not as pure kindness, but as a strategic move in a game he did not design. Taken together, these threads show a man being squeezed from every direction. Out in the world, his act of heroism has linked him to a performer whose identity challenges his prejudices. At home, his daughter's pregnancy has forced him to revisit his own memories of fatherhood, and to admit that love can make even a stubborn man soften. At work, the possibility of a woman being promoted over him threatens his sense of masculine worth. Through all of this, Edith continues to be the quiet center, offering tea to Beverly, hugging Gloria through tears, coaxing Archie toward empathy without openly defying him. Michael is forced to translate his ideals into real choices that affect the people he loves. Gloria must find a way to trust that she can become a mother without losing herself. And Beverly shows them all, simply by standing in their living room and thanking Archie, that humanity is more complicated and more generous than the boxes they try to stuff it into. By the end of this period, nothing has been magically solved. Archie is still full of contradictions. He can save a stranger's life, and then panic when that stranger does not fit his expectations. He can rail against women's equality and still sit for hours talking his daughter through her fear. He can sneer at social change even as he is nudged into changing, one uncomfortable step at a time. The Bunker household remains noisy, argumentative, and imperfect, but beneath the shouting there is a stubborn current of loyalty. It is that loyalty to each other, even when they do not fully understand each other, that allows them to survive a world that refuses to stand still.